In a quiet mansion in Lagos, a baby's cry broke the silence, a cry that changed everything. Grace thought she was just a housekeeper, but one act of kindness pulled her into a secret this family had buried for years. Behind those glass walls lived power, pain, and something far darker than money could hide. By the time you reach the end of this story, you'll never look at people the same way again. So before we begin, hit subscribe, drop your country in the comments, and grab your popcorn, because what you're about to hear will stay in your mind long after the screen goes dark. Morning sunlight spilled through the tall glass windows of the mansion in Ikoyi. The house was silent, too silent for a place that big. The polished tiles shone so bright you could almost see your face in them. Grace Adami moved quietly from room to room, dusting and arranging with the care of someone who had learned to disappear. For 3 years she had worked here, cleaning after strangers, obeying orders and keeping her head low. The house belonged to Mr. Tund Williams, one of Lagos's richest real estate men. People said he owned half of the island, but inside his house it felt like time never moved. Grace was wiping the kitchen counter when she heard it, a faint sound, soft at first like a radio far away. She paused. It came again, sharper this time, cutting through the silence. A child's cry. Her heart jumped. She looked around. The cook was outside, probably arguing with the supplier again. The senior housekeeper had gone to the market. There was no one else inside. The cry grew louder. It was coming from upstairs. Grace dropped the towel and ran up the spiral staircase. Her slippers slapped the marble steps as she followed the sound until she reached little David's room. Her breath caught. The baby lay red-faced in his cot, fists flying, his diaper soaked through. The smell hit her before she even reached him. His cheeks were wet, his small chest rising and falling fast. "Oh God," she whispered, scooping him up. "Who left you like this?" He buried his face in her shoulder, his sobs breaking into hiccups. She rocked him gently, patting his back. He clung to her uniform, trusting her instantly, like he already knew her heart. Grace glanced around the nursery. No nanny in sight. The baby's toys were scattered, bottles still unwashed on the table. Then her eyes landed on a folded piece of paper on the dresser. She picked it up and read the short note twice. "I can't continue, I won't be coming back. Funk." That was all, no reason, no apology. Grace stood frozen, the note trembling in her hand. The nanny had simply vanished. She looked back at the baby in her arms. He was still crying softly, tired and hungry. "Don't worry," she murmured, pressing her cheek to his. "I go take care of you." The bathroom in the nursery only had a shower. The baby's tub was kept in Madam's suite upstairs, the forbidden zone, but Grace couldn't let him stay like this. She hurried down to the kitchen, balancing the crying child on her hip. She rinsed the big stainless steel sink, scrubbed it clean, and ran warm water. Testing it with her elbow, she nodded and whispered, "Perfect." She pulled off the baby's dirty clothes and gently set him in the warm water. "See, no more crying him," she said with a smile. David blinked, his tears stopping slowly. When she began humming a soft Yoruba lullaby, he smiled for the first time, splashing the water with his tiny hands. Grace laughed quietly, the sound filling the kitchen like sunshine. Then the door opened. She froze. Standing at the doorway was Tund Williams himself, tall, dark suit, gold wristwatch, eyes sharp as knives. He stopped, staring at the sight before him, his housekeeper bathing his son in the sink. "What on earth is this?" His voice shook the room. Grace almost dropped the soap. "Sir, I can explain." "You're bathing my son in the sink." He stepped forward. "Are you out of your mind? Who gave you that permission?" Grace's hands trembled, but she held the child close. "Sir, the nanny left a note. David was dirty and crying. I couldn't just leave him." "You should have called Mrs. Daramola," he barked. "She wasn't here, sir. No one was." The baby started to cry again, frightened by the loud voice. Grace rocked him softly. "SHHH, it's okay, my dear." To Tund's surprise, the baby calmed instantly. David never stopped crying that fast, not even for his trained nannies. He looked at Grace again, confused, a strange feeling stirring inside him. Before he could speak, footsteps hurried down the hall. Mrs. Daramola appeared, her wrapper swaying, face full of shock. "Jesus, what is going on here?" Grace tightened her grip on the baby. "Grace, have you lost your senses?" The older woman snapped. "You're a cleaner, not a nanny." "I know, Ma, but the baby needed help." "Don't talk back to me." David whimpered again. Grace whispered softly to him, and he immediately relaxed in her arms. The senior woman's lips pressed tight, as if the child's calmness had insulted her pride. Tund turned to Mrs. Daramola. "Did you know the nanny was gone?" Her eyes widened. No, sir, I just heard and called the agency. They said they'll send a replacement soon. What time did you call? This morning, around 9. Grace spoke up carefully. Sir, when I came at 7, he was already crying. I don't think anyone checked on him before that. How dare you talk to me like that? Mrs. Daramola shouted. I'm sorry, Grace said quickly, but the child was suffering. Enough, Tun's voice echoed through the house. Silence fell. Even the hum of the fridge seemed to stop. He stared at the baby, now playing with Grace's necklace, then at Grace herself. For the first time, he saw her differently. Not as the invisible cleaner, but as someone who had shown real care when everyone else had failed. Mrs. Daramola, he said coldly, bring me the agency's number. She hesitated. It's upstairs in my bag. Then go and bring it. She turned quickly and left. Grace looked down, afraid to speak. Sir, I didn't mean to disrespect anyone. I just couldn't watch him cry like that. Tund exhaled, pulling at his tie. David now grabbed his father's finger, giggling. The sight melted something inside him. For months, he'd been too busy signing contracts and attending meetings to notice his own son. He looked at Grace. You've been here 3 years, right? Yes, sir. And I never even asked about you. She hesitated, unsure how to respond. There's not much to say, sir. I have a daughter, but she doesn't live with me. Tund frowned slightly. Why not? Her voice softened. After my husband died, I lost everything. The welfare people said I couldn't care for her, so they took her. Her name is Sarah. She's 4. He looked away, guilt twisting in his chest. All this time, he had never once thought about the people who kept his mansion spotless. Not until this moment. Mrs. Daramola returned, clutching a scrap of paper. Sir, I spoke with the agency. There was a mix-up. The new nanny will arrive tomorrow. Tomorrow? Tund's tone hardened. So this baby was left alone all morning because of your mix-up. The older woman swallowed. I thought. Enough, he said sharply. I'll handle it from here. He turned back to Grace. Please clean up and prepare some food for him. I'll decide what to do later. Grace nodded quickly, grateful just to keep her job. She wrapped David in a towel and carried him upstairs. He rested his tiny head on her shoulder, calm again. Minutes later, he was fast asleep in his crib. Grace stood over him for a moment, watching his chest rise and fall. She smiled softly, unaware that what she had done out of kindness would change her life forever. Downstairs, Tund sat alone in the dining hall. The note from the missing nanny lay crumpled in his hand. He looked at the paper, then at the quiet staircase leading up to his son's room. For the first time in years, he didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But deep down, something told him this was only the beginning. The next morning came too quickly. A soft mist hung over the streets of Ikoyi, wrapping the neighborhood in quiet. But inside the Williams mansion, tension brewed like a storm. Grace was in the laundry room, folding freshly ironed shirts. Her hands moved fast, but her mind wasn't there. She kept thinking about what had happened yesterday, Tund's anger, the crying baby, the way David had clung to her like she was the only safe thing left in his small world. She prayed she wouldn't lose her job. She couldn't afford that, not again. Not when she was still saving every naira to see her daughter Sarah one day. Suddenly, a voice startled her. Grace. She turned sharply. It was Tund, standing at the doorway in a crisp white shirt, looking more tired than usual. He rarely spoke to staff directly, but today he seemed different. Yes, sir, she asked carefully. I need to talk to you. She dropped the folded shirts and followed him into the sitting room. The house smelled of polish and quiet money, glass tables, white curtains, everything shining. But behind all that shine, there was a heaviness in the air. Tund sat, rubbing his temples. About yesterday, he began slowly. I was angry. I shouldn't have shouted. You did what you thought was right. Grace blinked, surprised. Sir, it's fine, I understand. No, he said, it's not fine. I left my son in the hands of strangers, and it took someone I barely know to care for him properly. She didn't know what to say. Her eyes dropped to the floor. He leaned back in the chair, watching her quietly. How old did you say your daughter was? She's 4, sir. Same age as David soon, he murmured. Do you ever see her? Grace shook her head slowly. No, sir, they placed her in foster care. I only get letters sometimes. I just hope she's okay. Tund nodded, silent for a moment. I'll make some calls later. Maybe I can help. Her eyes widened. "Sir, you don't have to." "I want to," he said softly. Then, after a pause, "You'll look after David until the new nanny comes." Her heart skipped. "Sir, me?" "Yes, you clearly have a gift with him. I'll increase your pay for the extra work." Grace's throat tightened. "Thank you, sir, I'll do my best." He smiled faintly, the first real smile she had seen on his face since she started working there. "I know you will." From that day, everything inside the mansion changed. Grace became David's shadow. She fed him, played with him, carried him on her hip while cleaning. The boy laughed more, slept better. Even the cook noticed. "Madam Grace," he teased one afternoon, "this baby Don fall in love with you." Grace smiled shyly. "He just needs love, that's all." But not everyone liked the change. Mrs. Daramola began watching her closely, her lips always pressed tight. She didn't like how the boss now spoke softly to Grace, how his tone changed whenever she was around. To her, it smelled like danger. That evening, after dinner, Mrs. Daramola entered the kitchen while Grace was washing bottles. "You think you're clever, Abby," she said coldly. Grace turned, confused. "Ma, you think I don't see what's going on? You want to use that child to win the master's heart." Grace frowned. "What are you talking about? I'm only doing my job." The older woman stepped closer, her eyes sharp. "I've worked here 15 years. I know how girls like you start, pretending to care until the man forgets himself." Grace's face flushed with hurt. "Please don't say that, I respect him. He's my employer." Mrs. Daramola hissed, shaking her head. "We'll see." She left, but her words stayed like a shadow in Grace's mind. She tried to shake it off, but doubt crept in. She didn't want trouble, she only wanted peace. Later that night, while the mansion slept, Grace stood by David's crib. The boy was fast asleep, his small chest rising slowly. She brushed his curls and smiled faintly, but then a sound made her freeze. A soft thud. She turned, the hallway outside was dark. Another sound, footsteps, slow, heavy, moving toward the nursery. Her breath caught. "Who's there?" she whispered. No answer. The steps stopped just outside the door. Her pulse pounded. She took a slow step toward the door and pulled it open slightly. Nothing, only the long, empty corridor lit by the faint glow of wall lamps. She stood there for a moment, listening. The mansion was silent again. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe the driver had come in late. She closed the door quietly and locked it from inside, her hand trembling. The next morning, when she came downstairs, the driver was already outside, washing the SUV. "Did you come in late last night?" she asked. He looked puzzled. "No, Ma, I slept in the boys' quarters since 8. Her stomach tightened. So who had been walking near the nursery? By afternoon, Tund left for a meeting. The mansion grew quiet again. Grace sat on the floor with David, building small towers with his toy blocks. His laughter filled the room like music, but every creak of the house made her glance over her shoulder. When she went to the laundry room later, she noticed something odd. The folded note from the missing nanny, Funk, that had been kept on the counter was gone. She frowned. "Who took that note?" she asked the cook. He shrugged. "I never see 'em since yesterday evening." She checked the drawers under the fruit basket, everywhere. Nothing. The note had vanished. That night, Tund returned home earlier than usual. "How's he?" he asked, nodding toward his son. "Sleeping," Grace replied softly. He smiled, then noticed the worry on her face. Something wrong. She hesitated. "The note the nanny left, it's missing." He frowned. "Missing?" "Yes, sir, I kept it on the counter, but now it's gone." He stood still, thinking. Only a few people come in and out of this house. "Exactly, sir. Maybe Mrs. Daramola took it." Grace said nothing, but she could tell from the way he said it that he didn't trust the woman as much as before. "Don't worry," he said finally. "I'll check the security cameras tomorrow." Grace nodded, though unease still lingered in her chest. That night she couldn't sleep. The image of those footsteps outside the nursery kept replaying in her mind. Around midnight, she got up, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and went to check on David. He was fine, sleeping peacefully, thumb in his mouth. But as she turned to leave, something made her stop. On the wall near the window, faint but clear, was a small smear like a handprint. But it wasn't hers. The fingers were long, narrow, and the mark was dark, almost like soot. Grace's breath hitched. She reached out slowly to touch it, and froze when she noticed the window latch. It was unlocked. Her heart raced, she locked it quickly, stepped back, and whispered a prayer. Downstairs, the grandfather clock ticked softly. The mansion seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Somewhere in the darkness outside, a figure moved past the window, silent as a shadow. Grace never saw it, but the next morning she would find something else, something that would make her question everything she thought she knew about the missing nanny. The next morning, the sky over Ikoyi was heavy with clouds. The mansion felt colder than usual, as if the walls themselves were holding secrets. Grace entered the kitchen early. The cook hadn't arrived yet, and the house was quiet except for the soft hum of the fridge. She poured water into a pot for Pap and stared out the window. Her thoughts kept circling back to that handprint, dark, strange, and too high for a child to make. She had wiped it off before anyone saw it, but the question remained, who entered the room last night? When Tund came downstairs, she greeted him softly. "Good morning, sir." He nodded, distracted, already checking his phone. "Morning, Grace, did you sleep well?" "Not really, sir." He looked up, noticing the tiredness under her eyes. "Why, the baby?" "No, sir, something else." Before she could explain, Mrs. Daramola walked in, her face already set in disapproval. "Sir, I've prepared your schedule for the day," she announced, placing a file on the table. Then turning to Grace, "You go and check the guest rooms. We'll have visitors tomorrow." Grace hesitated. "Yes, Ma." She turned to leave, but Tund stopped her. "Wait, what were you about to say?" Grace hesitated. The older woman's sharp eyes were on her like knives. "Nothing serious, sir," she said quickly. "Just tired, that's all." Tund frowned slightly but didn't push further. "All right, take care of yourself." Grace nodded and walked away, though her chest felt heavy. She could feel Mrs. Daramola's stare burning her back as she left. Upstairs, as she entered the guest room, she noticed something new, a photo frame on the dresser, one she hadn't seen before. She paused. It showed Tund, his late wife, and baby David, smiling on a beach. But behind them, blurry in the background, was another face, a woman's face. Grace leaned closer. The woman wasn't smiling. Her eyes looked straight into the camera. She blinked, chills running down her arms. It looked like the missing nanny, Funk. She picked up the frame carefully, studying it. How did her face end up there? And why did she look afraid? "Grace!" She jumped, almost dropping the frame. Mrs. Daramola stood at the door, her arms folded. "What are you doing there?" "I was cleaning, Ma," Grace said quickly. "Then clean, don't stand staring at people's pictures." Grace nodded, placing the frame back gently. But as she turned away, she noticed something, a small folded paper tucked behind the frame's back cover. When the older woman left, Grace returned quickly and pulled the paper out. It was a piece of torn envelope. There was writing on it, shaky, hurried. "If anything happens to me, tell him the truth. It wasn't an accident." Her hands trembled. "What truth?" she whispered. She folded the paper and hid it inside her apron pocket, her heart pounding. Later that afternoon, while feeding David, she kept glancing at the paper like it might vanish. When the boy fell asleep, she went downstairs and found Tund in his study. "Sir, can I talk to you?" He looked up from his laptop. "Of course, what is it?" Grace hesitated. "I found something, in one of the picture frames upstairs." She handed him the folded paper. He read it, his brow tightening. "Where exactly did you find this?" "In the guest room, behind the family photo." He leaned back, staring at the paper again. "This handwriting, it looks like Funk." Grace nodded. "Yes, sir, I think so." He was silent for a long moment, then said, "She left without warning. No calls, no message, just that note. But this," he held up the paper, eyes narrowing. "This sounds like she was scared." Grace swallowed, so maybe she didn't leave on her own. He looked at her sharply. "What do you mean?" "Last night I heard footsteps near the nursery. The window was unlocked, and this morning this paper appeared." Tund stood, packing. "You think someone came back into this house?" Grace didn't answer. She didn't need to. He ran a hand through his hair. "All right, I'll check the CCTV myself." But when he tried later that evening, something strange happened. All the recordings from the last 2 nights were gone, completely erased. "Impossible," the driver said, scratching his head. "We didn't touch the system, sir." Tund stared at the blank screen, anger and fear mixing in his eyes. Then someone did. That night, the mansion didn't feel safe anymore. Grace kept the baby close to her side even after he fell asleep. Every sound made her jump, the creak of the ceiling fan, the drip from the tap, the rustle of trees outside. Around midnight, a cold breeze slipped through the curtains. Then came another sound, a faint tapping, like fingernails on glass. Grace's eyes flew open, the window. She turned slowly, heart hammering. The tapping stopped. For a long time there was silence. Then a shadow moved across the glass. She gasped and backed away, clutching David tightly. The shadow paused, then slid away into the darkness outside. She rushed to the window and peered out. The garden below was empty, but the gate light flickered once, then went off completely. The next morning, she told Tund everything. He didn't speak for a while, then he said, "I'll call the police." But before he could, the cook came running from the backyard, his face pale. "Ogre, come see, something day for ground near the fence." They followed him outside. Near the corner of the fence, half buried in the soil, was a handbag, old, dirty, covered in dust. Grace recognized it instantly. It was Funk. Tund knelt, opening it carefully. Inside were baby items, a small photo of Funk holding David, and a torn ID card. The name on it wasn't even hers. Tund looked up, stunned. This is not her real name. Grace's voice shook. "Then who was she, sir?" He didn't answer. His mind raced. If the woman working for him wasn't who she claimed to be, then who had he allowed inside his home, and near his child? Mrs. Daramola appeared behind them, clutching her wrapper. "What's going on?" Tund's eyes were cold when he faced her. "You told me the agency sent her." "Yes, sir," she said nervously. "That's what they said." "I checked that agency," he said quietly. "They've never heard of her." Silence fell like a slap. The older woman froze. "So that can't be." "It is," he said sharply. "So tell me, Mrs. Daramola, who really brought that woman into my house?" Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her hands trembled. Grace stared, realization dawning in her eyes. "Ma, you knew her." Mrs. Daramola stepped back slowly. "I don't know what you're talking about." But her voice shook. Tund stood straight, anger burning in his tone. "You'd better start talking, because if you don't, the police will." The older woman's lips pressed tight, her eyes darting between them. And just then, David's cry echoed from upstairs, sharp, panicked, like he had seen something. Grace turned and ran toward the sound, her heart pounding. When she reached the nursery door, it was open, curtains flapped wildly from the wind. The crib was empty. Grace froze at the nursery door. The empty crib seemed to pull the air from her lungs. She shouted, "David," and rushed inside, checking behind the curtains, under the bed, everywhere, nothing. Her heart pounded as she turned in circles. The window was still swinging open from the wind, the white curtains fluttering like ghosts. Downstairs, Tund came running, his face pale. "What happened?" "The baby, he's gone," Grace cried. Tund's eyes widened. "Gone where?" "I don't know, sir. The window was open." Without another word, he bolted out of the room and ran toward the backyard. Grace followed, her feet shaking on the tiled floor. Mrs. Daramola trailed behind, muttering prayers under her breath. Outside, the morning was strangely silent. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing. The three of them searched everywhere, behind the garden fence, near the trees, even around the servant quarters. Then Grace heard it, a soft, familiar sound. A baby's whimper. "Listen," she whispered. They followed the sound to the side of the compound, near the old water tank. The cry came again, faint but clear. Grace ran ahead and gasped. David was lying gently on the grass. Someone had wrapped him in a faded blue shawl. He wasn't hurt, just sleeping. Grace lifted him carefully, tears filling her eyes. "Thank you, Jesus." But Tund's face was still dark. "This means someone entered this compound," he said, again. Mrs. Daramola trembled. "So maybe she's back." Tund turned to her sharply. "Who?" The older woman's voice cracked. "Funk." Grace stared at her. "You mean she's alive?" Mrs. Daramola nodded slowly, her eyes wet. "Yes, I think she never left Lagos. She called me once after she disappeared. She said she was in danger. She begged me not to tell anyone." Tund's voice was tight. "And you kept that from me?" "I was afraid, sir. She said if I spoke, the boy would not live." The world seemed to tilt around them. Tund rubbed his face, disbelief heavy in his breath. What did she mean by that? Mrs. Daramola began to sob. I don't know, sir, but she said something about a curse about this house. Grace felt chills spread across her arms. A curse? Yes, the older woman whispered. Before your wife died, she brought in a woman, an old herbalist from Ijbu. She said strange things were happening in the nursery, that the baby cried at night like he saw something. The woman warned her that the house stood on old land, a burial ground. She told her to protect the child with a mark. What kind of mark? Tund asked quietly. The same one Grace saw on the wall, she whispered. The handprint. Grace stepped back, trembling. So that wasn't a stain. Mrs. Daramola shook her head. No, my dear. It was a seal to keep the spirit from touching the child. When the old madam died, the mark faded, and the spirit returned. Tund's voice broke. What spirit? Mrs. Daramola wiped her tears. The one buried under this land before the house was built. A woman who lost her baby in the old war. They said she still walks at night, searching for her child. The air went cold. Grace clutched David tightly, so she was trying to take him. Tund looked at the baby's face, peaceful, innocent. No, he whispered. She wasn't trying to harm him. She was trying to claim what she thought was hers. They stood there in silence, the sound of the wind filling the space between them. Later that evening, as the sky turned gold and soft rain began to fall, Grace sat with David in her arms. The storm clouds rolled gently, like the heavens themselves were sighing in relief. She hummed to him softly, watching his tiny chest rise and fall. Tund came to stand by the window, his suit jacket off, looking exhausted. I called the police, he said quietly. They'll search for Funk, but I don't think she'll ever come back. Grace nodded slowly. Maybe she was protecting him too, in her own way. He sighed, maybe. There was a long silence, broken only by the sound of rain against glass. Then Tund turned to her. Grace, I don't know what I'd have done without you. She looked up at him, surprised. Sir, I was only doing my job. No, he said softly. You did more than that. You saved my son. You brought peace back to this house. Grace smiled faintly. Then let's keep it peaceful, sir. No more secrets. He nodded. No more secrets. That night, the mansion finally slept. The lights were dim, the rain whispered against the windows, and for the first time in months, baby David slept without crying. Grace stayed awake a little longer, watching the shadows. She thought she saw something near the window, a faint figure, standing in the rain, watching quietly. It was a woman. Her face was calm, and she held her hands together, as if in prayer. Grace blinked, and she was gone, but somehow Grace felt no fear, only peace. She whispered, "Rest now," and closed the curtain gently. Downstairs, the family photo still sat on the dresser, but this time the strange face in the background was gone. Only the happy family remained, Tund, his late wife, and little David smiling under the sun. The house sighed quietly, the kind of sigh old walls make when they finally let go of a long-kept secret. And outside, the rain kept falling, soft, endless, and forgiving.